Bien, buenas noches. Un saludo a todas y todos. Es un enorme agrado volver a encontrarnos en esta penúltima sesión de educación crítica. Eh, Como señalaba hace un momento Juan, en la primera sesión tuvimos dos profesores, eh, una apoderada y gestora de un proyecto de educación alternativa en una zona del norte chico de Chile. En la segunda sesión tuvimos a la cientista política italiana Lucia Picarella de la Universidad de Salerno y que desde hace algunos años trabaja también en una universidad colombiana. En esta tercera sesión tenemos de invitado a Peter McLaren. Con Peter hemos estado en esta última semana en permanente comunicación. Él nos hizo saber hace como 15 días que tenía algunos serios problemas de salud, eh, que quizás le podrían dificultar estar personalmente acá, pero nos hizo llegar un material que él grabó, un video, donde en 28 minutos él expone algunas de sus ideas esenciales respecto a la educación crítica y su papel hoy día. Es probable que en los últimos 15 o 20 minutos de este encuentro pudiese incorporarse Peter, porque en la última conversación la tuvimos ayer y dijo voy a hacer todo lo posible, pero eh, tengo una hora con un médico y estoy muy complicado. Así que bueno, esperemos que pueda finalmente incorporarse. Yo hace una hora atrás le envié el enlace, eh, por si entonces, en caso que él pueda participar. Y bueno, aparte del video, él nos hizo llegar eh, un artículo de reciente publicación en referencia a el fascismo postdigital, lo que él llama el fascismo postdigital, que si ustedes dejan su correo también seguramente Juan se lo hará llegar. Y ese artículo está traducido al español y aparte de eso, el día de ayer o hoy día, no me acuerdo, me hizo llegar un artículo en inglés donde hace un análisis del peligro de la guerra nuclear, en fin. Porque la educación crítica en realidad se refiere a eso, se refiere no solo a lo que pasa en las aulas de clases, sino cómo lo que ocurre en las aulas de clases se relaciona con las objetividades y subjetividades de quienes son protagonistas de la educación. Bueno, eso él lo va a explicar en el material que vamos a pasar a ver. ¿Cuál es la idea? Una vez que este material termine, repito, el video dura 28 minutos, la idea entonces es que podamos empezar a generar una reflexión colectiva, a construir pensamiento colectivo, de manera de plantearnos algunas reflexiones, principalmente en torno a cómo hoy día la educación crítica puede eh, impregnar las salas de clase de la educación formal. Eh, Hay una, nos contaba Peter McLaren, en el artículo que nos envió también lo señala, eh, en Estados Unidos está pasando casi lo mismo que en el resto de países de América Latina, en Chile, por ejemplo, que es el avance del fascismo, o en Argentina, de este neofascismo, y que se ha ido apoderando de las redes sociales, Facebook, Instagram, etcétera. Entonces, ¿cómo desde la educación podemos, eh, desde la educación crítica, podemos hacer frente a este proceso? Así que bueno, Juan va a compartir el video. El video tiene una traducción simultánea que ofrece la misma plataforma que va a compartir Juan. Eh, Algunas palabras a veces no son las exactas. Por ejemplo, cuando habla de Freire, en algún momento dice Freire, pero en la traducción aparece como, a ratos aparece como Freddy, o en otras oportunidades solo FR. En fin, pero son detalles menores. Las ideas principales de Peter McLaren se entienden perfectamente en este video. Así que eso, la invitación está hecha. Una vez que termine esta exposición de Peter, en general empezamos el intercambio de reflexiones, el diálogo, la conversación y manteniendo la esperanza hasta el final de que Peter se pueda incorporar. Muchas gracias.
No soy experto en la materia, yo espero que se escuche bien. ¿Están viendo a Peter en este minuto ustedes? Por favor, si me dan un feedback.
Sí, estamos viéndolo.
¿Sí? Muy bien. Hasta ahí,
Sí.
hasta ahí estamos bien. Entonces voy a hacer correr. Está la traducción simultánea, como bien dice Edgardo, y espero que se escuche como corresponde ustedes. Así que
Sí,
Amplía la pantalla, ponlo
exacto,
grande.
voy a
exacto,
ampliar
ampliar
la
la pantalla.
pantalla, sí, pero para poderla ampliar quería ver si había algún elemento que yo tenía que abrir primero que nada. Voy a
Sí,
ampliarla,
se escucha hasta el momento su voz. Juan se está escuchando.
pero quiero que escuchen a Peter. Ahí va, a ver si lo escuchan bien. Me di-
No, no se está escuchando.
No se escucha. No se escucha.
eh, sé que tengo que apretar algo. Un
Sí,
segundo.
cuando
Sí,
perdón, Juan, cuando sea compartir pantalla, o sea, volver a salir de que nos estás compartiendo. Y entonces le das compartir y abajito viene un recuadro que dice compartir con audio.
¿quién está hablando? ¿Quién fue que me dio esas indicaciones?
Luz María.
Luz María, solamente para saber a quién tengo que enviarle después una flor.
No, con todo gusto. O sea, ahí donde otra vez compartir pantalla y aparece un nuevo recuadro y abajito dice compartir con audio.
Compartir con sonido, dice.
Exactamente, ahí es.
Muy bien, ahora sí, muchas gracias.
No, de nada.
A ver si todo funciona bien ahora.
Of critical pedagogy as I
Perfecto, se escucha.
Ahora se escucha, quizá hay
Muy
que
bien,
subir un poquito el volumen, pero se
Volumen, si
escucha.
puede, si
perfecto,
puede pues, subirle un poco volumen. Ahí
ya lo
está.
hice. Muy bien.
Gracias.
thank you for your kind invitation for me to spend some time with you this evening or this afternoon or this morning, whatever time it is where you're tuning in from. I'm going to speak for about 20 odd minutes on some of the features of critical pedagogy as I have understood. Critical pedagogy acknowledges that our objective and subjective worlds are internally related. This understanding is central to comprehending what, excuse me, Brazilian philosopher and educator Paulo Freire meant by his very famous term, conscientização. My Portuguese is terrible. The development of critical consciousness for the liberation of humanity. This eventually stipulates the development of a transformative praxis, the interpenetration of theory and practice, which forms a knife edge upon which we balance our precarious lives, which requires that humans both individually and collectively, act as subjects in the world as opposed to being relegated to objects to be acted upon. Critical pedagogy is a dialectical philosophy and pedagogy that is very different from the rational formal logic of, say, the positivistic sciences. In dialectics, things can only be understood in relation to each other and cannot be analyzed as independently existing pieces. Freire teaches that human consciousness is distinct. Why? Because humans have the capacity to adapt to reality, plus the critical capacity to make choices and transform that reality. Only when we understand the dialectical relationship between consciousness and the world, that there is no separation between these, can we begin to read the word and the world simultaneously and transform the world. We understand that our consciousness comes from dialectical interaction with that world and other humans. So we need to consider our consciousness first and foremost as a social consciousness. We don't think independently from others. All of our ideas are populated by other people's meanings. Praxis occurs when we exercise our agency, or another word for agency could be volition, along with our critical consciousness, in order to move beyond our conditioning process and social determinations in order to change our world. Throughout history, dialogue has helped us to communicate with each other much more critically. It's created solidarity among human beings and helps us collectively interact with the world. It prevents us from simply depositing our ideas into other people's minds, a process that Freire condemned as banking education. In dialogue, we can't treat others as objects. In dialogical learning, we are made and remade as learners and teachers. There is now a range of, well, political dimensions to critical pedagogy. So it's safe to say there isn't really a critical pedagogy. There are critical pedagogies in the plural, right? There's liberal, there's progressive educators identifying as critical pedagogues, radical critical pedagogues, Marxist critical pedagogues, et cetera, who are surprisingly critical of extreme versions of pedagogical narratives that are now populating the social media. My particular approach to critical pedagogy, I call it a critical pedagogy in the service of building a socialist alternative to capitalism. Right? So I would identify my own critical pedagogy predilection as socialist. One of the major evolutionary, by the way, I should point out that I'm not against progressive teachers. I'm not against progressive liberal educators. I think they do make some important changes that are necessary, but they don't go far enough. But I wouldn't condemn them. One of the major evolutionary directions in which critical pedagogy is currently moving, of course, is digitalized learning. As machine learning, as robotics, AI, artificial intelligence, and market capitalization, critical pedagogy conceptualizes information as a form of social power. It's committed to resisting its weaponization, especially at a time of massive population surveillance through digital technologies. I'm writing a little bit more about digital and post-digital fascism, and learning a great deal as I initially did not address issues of technology, but I'm trying to address issues of technology with the help of some younger professors who have a stronger grasp than I do. Jandric, for instance, from Croatia. He's very good in that particular field, very, very good. We wrote a book together a couple of years ago. Many students regard teaching today as entertainment. They don't want to get depressed by learning about how difficult, painful, and exploitative the world can be. Many of them sort of retreat into their echo chambers, their digital echo chambers that the social media provides for them. Other students are trapped in the post-truth, fact-free universe of today's social media, where there exists no right or wrong, just temporarily held opinions about these issues. There's a lack of understanding of what constitutes an argument, how to adjudicate the argument, and what constitutes, for instance, an opinion. Students can retreat into digital platforms where they do not have their ideas questioned or challenged. Teachers, too, can fall victim to these same attitudes. Many of them focus on content without giving much thought to how students will respond. Students have sometimes responded in my class, for instance, with the assertion, well, that's your opinion, professor, and I have my opinion. Okay? Well, I respond that I'm not really asking for opinions, I'm asking for arguments. And I think it's really important to make a distinction between asserting an opinion and making a very cogent, convincing, persuasive argument. Students need opportunities to acquire new and challenging experiences, focusing on the socio-historical and political forces and contexts which reflect their own social identities. That's difficult to accomplish in today's classroom settings. Too many students receive knowledge passively in a decontextualized form, or the students to memorize and repeat on standardized tests. Critical pedagogy encourages students to grasp knowledge dialectically in relation to current problems and injustices in order to transform society in the interest of social justice, within an ethics of compassion, an ethics of care, an ethics of fairness. What is needed, I think, is a problem-posing model of education which can lead to critical consciousness, resulting from a dialogical engagement about the manifold complexities of students' lives and their lived experience. Well, critical pedagogy isn't designed to offer solutions to oppression, to inequalities in our solutions to the inequalities in our social universe. It's not solution giving as much as it is problem posing. In order to change society, to change reality, we need to know what the key questions are that we should ask. That's the first step. Critical pedagogy is designed to create the conditions for educating creative thinkers who can, both individually and collectively, contribute to the betterment of society and help the most immiserated and vulnerable as a result of having developed a dynamic, what I call protagonistic agency and awareness. Strategies, skills, and problem-solving approaches foster the creation of critical revolutionary intellectuals who understand that the social, the political, and economic realities of life can be challenged and changed. Students develop a political criticality spawned in the life world of dialogical engagement that leads to transformative praxis. In critical pedagogy, students and teachers together control the educational process in order to engage in a larger socio-political struggle in order to challenge oppressive social conditions, in order to work towards a more just society. And I think what I've tried to add to this conversation is I've tried to add to this conversation the question of spirituality, the question of religion, the question of faith, for instance. Freire was a Catholic and a very devout Catholic who helped create the infrastructure for what is today called liberation theology, which is a pastoral tradition in the church, Catholic Church, that grew out of America Latina, right? So we know figures like Leonardo Boff, of Brazil, Oscar Romero from El Salvador, and many different figures who have, in some way, contributed to creating liberation theology. And liberation theology, of course, was attacked a great deal by the presidency of Ronald Reagan in the 1980s in the United States. And he conspired to destroy liberation theology. Actually, Pope John Paul II, also having grown up in communist Poland, was very much against liberation theology because of its grounding in Marxist analysis of class, for instance. But I believe that liberation theology can be a very powerful way of helping to understand and transform society. Because a lot of people that I have met really do have a spiritual life, and they claim that a lot of these liberation struggles don't address the question of faith and spirituality. So I've tried to start conversations around liberation theology as part of the larger critical pedagogy movement. And of course, one of the key figures in this, of course, is Paulo Freire, but also the great Jesuit theologian José Porfirio Miranda. Amazing theologian that I would highly recommend everybody read. And I certainly use his work a great deal in my work these days. So that critical pedagogy then encourages students to grasp knowledge dialectically in relation to current problems and injustices. It can sensitize students to the suffering of marginalized groups in society and create the conditions for dialogue and debate around issues such as systemic racism, the struggle of the LGBTQ community around the world, economic inequality, racism, the surveillance state, global capitalism, neoliberal capitalism, attacks on democracy and its global implications, disability rights, civil rights, and women's rights. And this is very important today because it's quite clear when we look around the globe, we're seeing the growth of fascist governments, and fascist movements. And there's a powerful fascist movement here in the U.S. Trumpism, right? The Make America Great Again cult, which seems to have taken over at least half of the population, or perhaps not half, but almost half, maybe more than half, here in the United States. And it's definitely a fascist movement. It works in all kinds of ways to capture the attention of Americans, or United Stadians, I should say. we're all Americans in in the Americas, so I should use the word United Stadians. And this is, this is really troubling, because I have a fear that Trump could very easily, even though he's indicted for all these crimes, he's still very popular. It seems that the more trouble he gets into, the more people support him. So this is quite scary. So I really do believe we're at a very critical existential crisis, political existential crisis in the globe today, with the growing popularity of fascism. And that's why I think when you look at the news, the media, especially the right-wing media in the United States, you're seeing attacks now, major attacks on critical race theory, which is a theory that teaches about the history of slavery in the United States and the history of institutionalized racism. There's tremendous attacks on that theory now, largely by white supremacists. These white supremacists are upset that teachers are addressing the question of racism in their classes. They don't want this. They don't want to feel uncomfortable. They don't want their children, their white children, to feel uncomfortable. And there's, I mean, it's a very complex. I don't have the time right now to get into it, but it's a very complex process. This Euro nationalism, Euro Christian nationalism. It's quite insidious. And as a matter of fact, in Florida, there's a governor called Governor Ron DeSantis. And Ron DeSantis has spearheaded a lot of bills and laws, new laws, that prohibit the teaching of race and racism, to prohibit it unless you teach it in a very sort of superficial way, right? They've even said that slavery, this is the MAGA Republicans have argued that slavery actually taught Africans useful skills. If you can imagine, as if somehow slavery was a good thing, when it was a horrendous institution, of murder, lynching, torture, brutality, separation of children and from their parents, and separation of families. It was just the most horrid time in U.S. history. And it's egregious that anyone would try to whitewash that institutionalized form of death and claim that it was useful and it was a good thing in many ways, right? So that's what we're facing now. Critical pedagogy now is being attacked on the global, on the national stage here in the United States. People are attacking, and I've been very saddened to see some of these attacks occurring on critical pedagogy that are coming from Canada. Canada, the Canadian Conservatives are being influenced by Trump's strategies and tactics and his fascist ideology. There, of course, it I'm saw a video a few weeks ago that was, accusing me of poisoning the minds of students in schools, et cetera, and of course, this is followed by death threats and the usual craziness that is Estados Unidos, las entrances de la bestia, right? In the belly of the beast. Well, anyway, I'm going to sort of wind down now by just making a few more comments about Paulo Freire. Freire came to understand that oppressed learners had internalized profoundly negative images of themselves, images that Freire identified as created and imposed by the oppressor, and felt powerless to make changes in their lives and become active agents in history. Freire created the conditions for learners to examine the limits and possibilities of the situations that emerged from the experiences of the learners, experiences that were often traumatic, they were often life-denying, right? They were necrophilic as opposed to biophilic, for instance. Critical consciousness, according to Freire, demanded a rejection of passivity and encouraged the practice of dialogue, wherein learners were able to identify contradictions in their lived experiences. What are those contradictions? And were able to reach new levels of awareness of how they were being made an object in a world where only subjects have the means to determine the direction of their lives. Made a choice to create history, right? Rather than being a casualty of history. So critical pedagogy is not really about discovering the truth of the world through theoretical study and then engaging in a step-by-step application of our knowledge to the world, but rather engaging the material world critically, right? In ways that enable an understanding of the world that seizes the will, seizes the heart, seizes the agency of the learner. Those who Freire referred to as the oppressed see a world that they believe has already been written and view themselves as having been written out of this narrative. Freirean critical consciousness is a type of protagonistic knowing that occurs by recognizing the world as an arena of struggle and seeking the means to overcome the privileging hierarchies that constitute it, effectively rewriting that world by being in and with the world, reading the world in the word, effectively rewriting that world by being in and with that world. That is, moving outside the fatalism that pervades the technocratic logic of capitalist modernity, right? Which traps so many of the oppressed as victims of history. So critical pedagogy then can be seen as becoming critically conscious, as a path to humanization, to our ontological vocation of becoming more fully human, as Freire put it. It's a path that creates the conditions of possibility of becoming agents capable of making history rather than remaining bearers of history's inevitability. This is what forms the basis of reading of the word and the world. A reading that is co-intentional, where the students become, the student is the educator and the educator is the student. protagonistic, and dialogical understanding. Comprehends that protagonistic or revolutionary agents are not born. They are dialectically produced by circumstances. To revolutionize society, it's necessary to revolutionize thinking. Yet at the same time, to revolutionize thinking, it's necessary to revolutionize society. All human development, including all thought and all speech, for Freire is social activity, and this has its roots in collective labor. It's important to understand that for Freire, process and the outcome of that process become one, which Freire refers to as critical consciousness. I think I should stop here, and that's just a very simple introduction to critical pedagogy. I'm very delighted that you've given me the opportunity to make this short video for you. Thank you for your invitation. Thank you for your support. It's wonderful to be here with you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Muy bien, muchas gracias. Peter, hola Peter, ¿cómo estás? Hello Peter. Alicia va a traducir y lo primero que quiero es agradecerle enormemente a Peter porque a pesar de serios problemas de salud que ha tenido en estos días, ha tenido el
I'm here.
compromiso y la consecuencia para estar acá. Ha ingresado hace unos minutos, así que bueno, yo creo que debido a los mismos problemas que ha tenido Peter, yo creo que hay que pensar tal vez en unas 2 o 3 preguntas y por favor que sean lo más acotadas posible. Alicia, por favor. No, no se escucha tu micrófono, tiene cerrado el micrófono, Alicia.
Silenciar los demás micrófonos, por favor.
Yes. Gracias, Edgardo. Thank you very much, Mr. McLaren. We are delighted to be with you this evening, and we are really honored to hear you, to see you, and to try to exchange some ideas with you. So Edgardo Caravantes is introducing you and asking the people here to ask 2 or 3 main clear questions. You know that the Latin Americans, we are not very clear, and many in questions, and many times we make a mess. So very clear questions in order to be answered by you. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very
¿Cuáles
much.
serían las preguntas entonces que harían ustedes para que yo pueda traducirlas a Peter McLaren? Gracias.
Las 3 primeras personas que pregunten entonces tienen la posibilidad de plantearlas. Vamos con la primera. Guido.
Bien, se escucha. Bueno, agradecido con la presentación y la pregunta es, ¿cuál es la profundización que él hace respecto a Paulo Freire y otros autores como hoy día la teoría, ¿cierto?, de la teología de la liberación que nos dejó recientemente Enrique Dussel? ¿Qué cree él para Latinoamérica? Si se va a ir profundizando y realmente instalando en las políticas públicas de los países latinoamericanos esta teoría, o simplemente ya eso. Ahí Alicia.
A ver si lo puedo hacer bien, Guido, porque pusiste 2 ideas diferentes, 2 ideas, digamos, no hay una. All right. So, Guido Asensio, our young Chilean colleague here, is asking, how do you think it can be deepened the ideas of Paulo Freire today? how we can make it. And particularly, not only Paulo Freire, but the theology of liberation. And also Guido asked about the presence of the thoughts and ideas of Enrique Dussel, how we can spread and widen Enrique Dussel as well, and particularly this issue related to Paulo Freire and Enrique Dussel and theology of liberation linked to public policies.
Yeah.
Is
Wow.
it clear?
Yes. Mi español es muy malo, lo siento. That's very good question. Enrique Dussel is, you know, I always think of him as the Hegel of the South. You know, he's one of the great thinkers of our time. And he came, well, he sent a video to introduce a conference organized by Instituto McLaren de Pedagogía Crítica in Ensenada. Well, we were very honored. And of course, Freire's work. I'm more familiar with Freire than I am with Enrique in terms of incorporating him into my own work. But I do recognize reading much of his work, and I'm also more familiar with a great Mexican Jesuit thinker, Jose Porfirio Miranda, who was, at least to me, has been central to my work in critical pedagogy. He's written some really profound work on basically on Christianity and socialism and communism. He was a communist.
Sorry, Peter, can you stop a little bit so I can translate and then you continue?
Okay.
May I? Okay. If
So
not, it's too long and perhaps I lose something important.
Sure.
Sure. Enrique Dussel dice, ¿qué digo? Peter McLaren dice que desde el primer lugar reconoce la importancia de Enrique Dussel, conoce su trabajo, sabe que es uno de los principales pensadores de nuestro tiempo en América Latina. Y desde luego él envió un trabajo muy importante introductorio cuando se lo requirió un estudio Dussel al Instituto McLaren. Pero considera que es mucho más familiar su trabajo y su conocimiento con respecto a Freire que a Dussel, reconociéndole, por supuesto, todas sus teorías. Él realmente, aquí de quien se reconoce conocedor, es entonces de todas las teorías de Freire y también del mexicano José Porfirio Miranda, que considera central en su construcción y su trabajo de pedagogía crítica, el de McLaren. Y sobre todo la influencia de José Porfirio Miranda y sus estudios del cristianismo y de qué manera introduce este cristianismo a McLaren y a sus estudios e investigación en la teología de la liberación. Ready.
Great. Okay. Freire, of course, had met the great Peruvian thinker Gustavo Gutierrez, and Freire has made some contributions to the theology of liberation, largely through, as I understand it, largely through Gustavo Gutierrez. But to me, we're living in these times of great insanity. At least my understanding of the conditions in North America, where I've been spending most of my time. I haven't been able to travel for the last 8 years because of a disability I have. So I've been mostly focusing on the political context in North America, particularly in the Estados Unidos. Freire's work Freire has become a pariah among the right. The right are focusing now. They're focusing, I think, largely because of the upcoming election, but they're demonizing Paulo Freire. Now, some of these Republicans, MAGA Republicans, make America great again Republicans, are are really focusing now on Paulo Freire and warning their readers, their constituents against the work of Freire. He's being turned into a devil now among Republicans.
Ok. Peter nos dice y destaca también el trabajo del peruano Gustavo Gutiérrez, con el cual, sin ninguna duda, Freire trabajó, intercambió ideas y construyó algunos conceptos. Pero dice que su foco actual, en este mundo de locura en que se está viviendo, y su situación, que también le ha impedido viajar en los últimos años, hace que él realmente se concentre en su estudio en Estados Unidos y sobre todo ha analizado todas las reacciones que producen las ideas de Freire en el mundo norteamericano y particularmente señala el hecho de que Freire se presenta como extraordinariamente criticado por la actualidad republicano, a quien concretamente se lo tilda de un... ¿Pueden apagarlos?
Sí, estoy solicitando que todo, no veo quién tiene el micrófono abierto, por favor, silenciar.
Y Romelia Negrete, por favor, apagar su micrófono. Muchas gracias.
Retomo la última idea de Peter McLaren, que me parece muy importante. Le repito, compañeros, él habla de su estancia en Estados Unidos casi permanente, su permanencia, entonces que se enfoca en analizar las ideas de Freire vinculadas con el ambiente norteamericano y encuentra que es extraordinariamente criticado en este país, particularmente desde la perspectiva republicana, y dice que prácticamente en este momento Freire es un diablo para ellos. Evil, utiliza el término evil, que es diabólico o diablo, para los republicanos. Ok,
Sí,
Peter.
y también I have been labeled as a disciple of Freire and have been equally demonized along with others in critical pedagogy. You know, my good friend Henry Giroux and others who introduced Paulo Freire to teachers in the United States. We didn't introduce, I wasn't the first to introduce Freire, but I was somebody who very early on, edited some books and wrote some books focusing on Freire's work. And Freire became very popular with teachers. And of course, the Republicans recognize that popularity and they're trying to warn their constituents. For instance, one example, I'll give you just one example, then I'll pause. The example is there was a video that was produced in Canada about Canadians that have influenced people outside of Canada. And in a very negative way. And of course, Paulo Freire was the central character, and they basically said Peter McLaren is responsible for the philosophy of transgenderism or something like that, something related to sexual politics or gender politics. And I don't write about that. It's just, they're just spouting lies. Their research into our work is very superficial. They don't quite understand it. And yet they create these videos and they have vast networks of people that are reading this, all under, I don't know, I'd like to ask you, is the term woke, WOKE, is that being used in outside of the United States and Canada? I'm not sure. The word woke.
Yeah. Well, como el caso de Paulo Freire, que es considerado prácticamente un diablo endemoniado o demonizado, esa sería la palabra buena en castellano para nosotros, también él ha sido demonizado. Es decir, como Freire, Peter McLaren también ha sido demonizado en Estados Unidos, así como su amigo Henri Giroux. En realidad, McLaren nos dice que él se considera un introductor de Freire en Estados Unidos y debido a esa culpa, por decirlo de alguna manera, eh, entonces es considerado así por los republicanos, quien tratan de contrarrestar y trataron de contrarrestar siempre las ideas y el pensamiento de Freire y aquellas personas que lo predicaban o lo enseñaban, como es su caso. Un caso típico, por ejemplo, es un trabajo que existe, ¿no es cierto?, en que los republicanos tratan de investigar qué gente realmente desde fuera del país, y sobre todo se enfocan en los canadienses, ha tratado de influir en la sociedad norteamericana a través de las ideas de Freire. Y dicen que desde esta perspectiva McLaren es culpable de ello, es culpable de que ideas externas vengan a influir en la sociedad norteamericana. También McLaren sería responsable y para ello se han creado extraordinaria cantidad de teorías, mentiras, inclusive videos, en los cuales se lo vincula a las teorías de McLaren, a cuestiones referentes a sexo, género, transgénero. Los que son presentados en forma muy superficial son creados a través de videos sucios. McLaren dice dust videos, videos sucios, pero que intentan de toda manera contrarrestar la importancia y el pensamiento de Freire y por lo tanto demonizan a su maestro.
Mm-hmm. See. And so, in Brazil, we had Bolsonaro. In Hungary, we have Orbán. We have, fascist leaders in other countries. Bolsonaro tried to replace Paulo Freire as the great patron of Brazilian education. Bolsonaro threatened to take a flamethrower to the writings of Paulo Freire and cleanse Paulo Freire from the minds, the institutionalized memory, the institutional memory of, or the historical memory, I should say, of Brazil. Bolsonaro, we call, Trump of the tropics. So this pattern isn't simply with Trump. This kind of pattern is happening in countries that are moving much more closely and aligning themselves with with fascism. So, you know, this is and of course we get the usual attacks on people that I've written about, like Che Guevara. I mean, almost you just go into the internet and put in Che Guevara's name, and you will get almost nobody defending Che. All of them, all these hundreds and hundreds of posts saying, you know, he was a mass murderer and insane and crazy, etc. So I've never seen the amount and the intensity of this hatred for questions of liberations, questions of, you know, colonialism, decoloniality, indigenous writing, indigenous cultures, etc. I've never seen such a profound hate. It's always been there, but it's never been this big and this intense. And this is what's problematic, I think. And I worry when Trump becomes president, because I think he will win the election. I hope he doesn't, but I fear now that he will, given the he is not popular anymore, especially with students, for his treatment of the bombing of Gaza.
Ya. Continuando con esta idea, y Edgardo me está diciendo que deberíamos pasar a la segunda pregunta, ¿eh? Continuando con esta idea, Peter McLaren habla entonces de cómo Freire es una figura molesta, absolutamente criticada por gobiernos fascistas, y toma como ejemplo el caso del presidente Bolsonaro en Brasil y cómo se atrevió en Brasil, Bolsonaro, a intentar reemplazar la figura histórica de Freire y la memoria histórica que Brasil tiene de él, lo cual demuestra la fuerza, ¿es cierto?, del odio, digamos. También habla de las teorías de odio, ahora lo voy a decir, con respecto a la memoria de Freire y de sus ideas. Él encuentra similitud igual en la memoria de Che Guevara e invita a que si ustedes abren en internet y ponen Che Guevara, como él lo ha hecho, encuentra infinidad, miles de comentarios, y todos estos comentarios del Che Guevara son en negativo, considerando una especie de monstruo que era un asesino. Entonces hay ataques sistemáticos preparados también, y es la conclusión de Peter McLaren que quiero destacar, ¿no es cierto? Una intensidad de odio profundo, sistemático, que está programado y que él nunca vio antes. Que él nunca vio antes, esta organización de la intensidad del odio contra todos aquellos pensadores, no solo Freire, que hablan de colonialismo, de decolonialismo, de los movimientos indígenas, de los pueblos indígenas, de su cultura, de género, de transexualidad. Es decir, realmente está impresionado por la intensidad que se vive en este momento, que también lo demuestra los sucesos de la Franja de Gaza, y está preocupado por la posibilidad de el acceso de Trump nuevamente al gobierno de Estados Unidos, porque esto daría lugar a una profundización de este proceso que le preocupa mucho.
And I would just end here by one short sentence. What is interesting and inspiring is to see the number of protests that are occurring on university campuses throughout the United States, and to a lesser extent, but at least in one university, McGill in Canada, these are protests against the Israel Defense Forces and their bombing of Gaza and genocide and et cetera, and there are just thousands of students. I've never seen anything like this since the 1960s.
Mías,
You
igual.
know, I'm 75, and I've been at the heart of those protests, in my lifetime. And it's good to see that these protests are out, and the students are really taking risks. They're many of them are being expelled from university. Many of them are being arrested. Many of them, are really taking risks. And of course, there are always people from the outside that aren't students that can they can they can be somewhat excessive, but overall, it's really good to see that these students have some kind of geopolitical acumen and geopolitical insights to be able to participate.
Yeah.
Alicia,
And after
Alicia,
this,
después de esta,
if there are any more questions after this, after
eso,
you.
después de esta traducción,
There
por favor,
are,
dale el
yes.
paso a Eric.
Sí, traduzco la última frase porque es una reflexión que hace. Lo interesante en este momento, al mismo tiempo de demostrar la sistematización y la intensidad del odio que se generaliza en todo el mundo, Peter señala que es particularmente interesante e inspirador, él utiliza esas dos palabras, interesting and inspiring, inspirador, que en estos momentos existan tantos movimientos y protestas en Estados Unidos, en el norte, ¿no? Pero habla de Estados Unidos, contra Israel y contra los bombardeos en Gaza. Nunca había visto antes esto, tiene 75 años, no lo había visto desde los años 60, ¿no? Cuando aparece esos movimientos. Nunca antes se habían repetido. Y lo ve ahora con interés, cómo se reproducen. Y sin ninguna duda, esos estudiantes realmente están arriesgándose mucho. Algunos han sido arrestados, otros han sido expulsados, otros tienen múltiples sanciones, de manera que hacer esto en este momento en Estados Unidos es riesgoso. Y sin embargo, él lo considera una perspectiva muy interesante a considerar que aparecería como un contrarrestar esta ola, digamos, de ideas fascistas. Y nos señala que deberíamos observarlo. ¿Listo? ¿Está claro?
Sí, muy bien. Pasemos a Alicia, a Ixchik.
Ok.
Sibilah Maltiosh, Peter, yo creo que te va a costar, pero mi saludo nace de mi corazón y nace de esta emoción al escuchar al maestro Peter, ¿sí? Yo quiero agradecer al tiempo y al espacio la oportunidad de escucharlo. Lo conocí hace 20 años con la alfabetización crítica y ahora escuchándolo me lleva mucho entonces a adentrarme al pensamiento maya cuando logro escuchar e identificar su pensamiento. Y hago esta pregunta porque yo también he analizado el pensamiento de Pablo Freire y he analizado el pensamiento de Pablo Freire porque se acerca mucho, quizá no con los mismos términos y conceptos, pero de la forma de vida de los pueblos ancestrales. Y era como mi duda, él que ha sido estudioso de Pablo Freire, un poco conocer, sé que él se creció con otros, pero sí creo que lleva también un fuerte conocimiento del pensamiento y la sabiduría ancestral de los pueblos del Brasil, dada su diversidad multicultural en esos territorios, pero no solo Brasil, háblese Perú, y donde él se fue moviendo. Entonces, mi duda es si cómo ve él la influencia del pensamiento de los pueblos originarios en el pensamiento de Paulo Freire. ¿Por qué? Porque lo que no se conoce no se valora. Y yo, en mi referente para la educación popular o para la pedagogía crítica en Guatemala, son también tratar de relacionar que ese pensamiento se construye también en estas comunidades que a lo mejor no han ido a la escuela ni a la universidad. Lo dejaría acá. Mateo Chagüe, muy agradecida, maestro Peter, y lo escucho fielmente acá.
Sí, nuestra querida, our dear friend Ichit from Guatemala, says you hello from her heart. And thanks very much the opportunity of this program to meet you again. She had known you 20 years ago, making literacy critic literacy in her country. And that is why he understands that the thoughts of Freire are very similar to the concepts and way of thinking and living of the natives in Guatemala. That is why she started to study Freire in order to link the relationship in between the main ideas of Pablo Freire with the ancestral knowledge, with the native knowledges, and how Freire works with that. That is the introduction of Ichik. Now the question, Peter.
Mm.
The question is, how do you see the influence of the ancestral knowledge and native knowledges in the process of thoughts of Paulo Freire? If you see that relationship, and if it is yes, how do you think this influence works?
That's a great question.
Yes,
And
it is.
that's a great question. You know, earlier today, I was sitting in a hospital, a waiting room, with my cell phone, which I don't like to read. I don't like to use it much. I much prefer a computer. But I was reading about the literature that I could find on this organization in Canada that has branded Freire and me and others as basically evil demons. I was just curious to read some of their literature so I could critique them. And the one article that I read was an attack on an indigenous, basically an indigenous chieftain in one of the First Nations. I think she was there. She was originally raised as an Ojibwe, and so I was. It was the incident was she got on an airplane. She had her bonnet of eagle feathers, and she put it in a container and took it on the airplane. And she had other baggage, which she put up, right, in the compartment. And she put her case with the war bonnet under her seat. It could fit under her seat. And she was told to remove it. And it had to go in a cargo department back in the airport. She was not allowed to put it under her seat. And she complained, of course, that this was important in her cosmology, in her religious beliefs. And this was a sacred bonnet of eagle feathers. And this writer was ridiculing her, saying things like, oh, what makes her so special? She has to conform to what everyone else, just this attack on this woman, who simply was honoring her tribal beliefs. And I just found that this was disgusting. And, I got so angry in reading this, I said, I'm going to try to find, the address of this person and write them about this and engage them. But the last Indigenous community that I spent any time in was just a few days actually, was in Chiran in Michoacan. And it was a Purepecha community that rely a great deal on the forests. And the drug cartels were coming in with trucks and removing truckloads of trees, right, from their community every single day. And so they wanted to, they showed me what they set up. What they set up was an armas defensas. They basically, got AK, 47s or AR-15 machine guns, and they set up, their, and this was who basically was really organizing this were the women in the community, they were pushing for this, and they've been able to stop the cartel from coming in and destroying their communities by taking out all the trees. And they've called this the defense of the forests. So I think that Freddy's work really ties in just powerfully. I know that in Instituto McLaren.
Peter, can you
Sorry,
make it?
I forgot.
Yeah, it is very difficult.
Okay, sorry, I
So
totally forgot.
please, yeah.
Okay, I'll stop.
Yeah, no, yeah. You have to make it a little bit shorter. The
I
stops.
will. I will.
Yeah,
I got
thank you very
so
much.
carried away.
Yeah. So, but I have to say something, Peter, and then I'm going to translate to our fellows here. The question of a chick is this, that I am not sure you are answering, but making surroundings. So I am not sure if you have understand or it is your way of answer. So please clarify. The question of a chick is, if you think that there is a relationship in between Paulo Freire ideas and the ideas of the ancestral cultures and natives.
Whether there
That
is
was
or could be.
No, if it exists.
If it already exists.
If it already exists, which is it? That was a question. So now I'm going to translate what I tell you, and I'm going to translate your answer. But that is a question. So now I'm going to translate this explanation. Compañeros, yo le dije a Peter que realice pausas más cercanas porque es extraordinariamente difícil traducir a una persona que no es traductora. Y sobre todo también le dije, me dirá Ichit, que me parece que le está respondiendo haciendo un rodeo, y le repetí la pregunta nuevamente de Ichit. Le dije, la pregunta de Ichit es, ¿qué vinculación o qué influencia él considera que hay entre las ideas ancestrales en la forma de construir el conocimiento de los nativos y Freire? Esa fue la pregunta de Chick. Y él responde con anécdotas y con su propia experiencia. Entonces, lo que me pareció es que no había entendido bien la pregunta. ¿Qué es lo que listo? ¿Qué es lo que contó Peter McLaren? Now, Peter, I'm telling you the story that you tell about the hospital, etc. Lo que contó Peter es que él estaba justamente hace unos días en el hospital, estaba leyendo su teléfono celular, que no lo hace habitualmente, le gusta más la computadora, pero lo estaba haciendo, y entonces encontró lecturas acerca del famoso caso de los pueblos nativos en Canadá y de cómo se habían realizado, digamos, acciones y actividades contra ellos de todo tipo. Inclusive cuenta una anécdota que él lee en esta lectura en el teléfono hace unos días, de que pueblos indígenas tenían costumbres que trataban de introducir en la escuela y en los institutos donde estaban, y eran absolutamente castigados por ello, ¿no? Y cuenta la historia de una mujer específicamente que estaba honrando a sus ancestros mediante distintos tipos de rituales, y estos eran considerados no solo insuficientes o no importantes, sino que no eran considerados de ninguna manera respetados por los propios canadienses. Cuenta también otro caso que hace muy poquito que estuvo en Michoacán, con un grupo de michoacanos vinculados con los ritos en los bosques. Y este grupo indígena que está en los bosques intenta mantener los bosques existentes y luchan contra escuadrones evidentes munidos de fusiles y de armas que atacan y talan los bosques, considerados y se llaman defensores de los bosques. Esa es la historia que él cuenta. Entonces yo le pregunto si puede contestar lo que decía Ichit, es decir, cómo ve este vínculo entre lo nativo, lo indígena, los saberes ancestrales y el pensamiento de Freire. O sea,
Here's
okay,
here's how I'd answer that directly. Paulo was very wary of having his work exported or transplanted in geographical and geopolitical contexts outside of Brazil. He was wary because those contexts, and I would say the same. I would add indigenous cultures, indigenous communities, what we call in Canada First Nations communities, because what he wanted people to do was translate his work. I don't mean literally translated, I mean translated his work in the contextual specificity of the people who were interested in it. They would translate it. I remember I had a conversation with President Hugo Chavez, and he told me they have their Freire in Venezuela, Simon Rodriguez, right? He said, whatever critical pedagogy, Peter, will emerge from Venezuela will be Venezolano. So it would depend on the willingness and the interest in the people whose struggles were specific, whose cultures were specific, whose histories were specific. How could they take Freire's work, and could they, and in what ways would they want to, right, incorporate or what I call critically appropriate Freire's work for their own struggles. Freire does not presume, did not presume to understand the nuances and details of the struggles that everybody was having around the world. He was more familiar with some struggles than others. That's why he loved to visit people to get understanding. But you want to understand the context, and so that would depend on the people who who were interested in Freddy's work. He didn't want somebody to come like me or anyone else and somehow, I'm exporting Frery's ideas.
Yeah.
People had to be interested to take it up. And what I do know is in Mexico, in the conferences I've been at, there seems to be a very strong interest in Freddy's work because people can identify with what he's saying. People that are struggling, people that are fighting and struggling for dignity, for food, for shelter, for literacy, for being able to communicate. Those people will very likely see a brother in Freddy. And that is so it has to come from them.
Bueno, la respuesta ahora a Ichik. Muy clara. McLaren dice que Freire estaba preocupado porque sus ideas fueran trasplantadas o exportadas a otras culturas. Temía, debido a su difusión, que éstas fueran trasplantadas en contextos muy diferentes a los que él había pensado. Y en realidad, la gente lo hacía y los pueblos lo han hecho, porque las ideas de Freire se vinculan con los intereses de la gente que quiere incorporarlas. Freire sabía esto y lo temía. Él lo que quería es que se hicieran en las distintas culturas apropiación crítica de sus ideas, pero no trasplante ni exportación de sus ideas. Él no presumía de ello ni le interesaba. Deseaba que sus ideas fueran contextualizadas en todas partes, y eso dependía de los pueblos y de la gente. No estaba de acuerdo con la exportación y adecuación artificial, en cierta forma, de sus ideas, sino su adecuación crítica a los contextos. En el caso de México, por ejemplo, existen grupos que evidentemente, ahora hablando de Peter McLaren, están interesados absolutamente por las ideas de Freire, y por supuesto que se trata de gente que lucha por la dignidad, por la comida, por la alfabetización, por trabajar, por la tierra. Es decir, que desde esa perspectiva tendrían intereses similares. Pero las ideas exactas no se exportan, sino que deben adecuarse. Y eso era lo que solicitaba Freire.
Bien, muy bien. Alicia, yo creo que Peter debe estar cansado y tú también, porque tú has hecho un excelente trabajo.
Yeah.
Y Peter, por sus problemas de salud, pienso que está cansado, entonces tal vez la última media hora, dejarla como para reflexionar con todos los participantes y las participantes. Por supuesto, Peter se puede quedar si así lo estima. Le damos infinitamente las gracias a Peter. Y bueno, hace unos años cuando estuvimos juntos también, yo le dije que cuando viniera a Chile nos comíamos una empanada.
Peter Edgardo said that he thinks that perhaps we are tired. I don't know if you are. I am not, but I am. I tried not to be. But so he proposed, Edgardo, to have this last half of an hour of this session in order to make the people exchange ideas and talk about your ideas and about what you had said here. Of course, you can stay here and we can translate you, but let's people circulate. We say in Spanish, circular la palabra. circulate the word. That is circular la palabra in Spanish. So the people dialogue in between us, and if they have another questions, we can make it. That is the purpose of Edgardo. And also Edgardo said that he had told you the last time that you were together that when you come to Chile, you are going to be favored with an empanada. That it is a characteristic Chilean food.
Yes, I love empanada.
Do you love it? Do you agree that we have this last half an hour with the people talking
Yeah.
about main ideas? I don't know. That is the proposal of Edgardo.
Okay. So,
Would you
would
want to keep here?
I could, it's up to you.
Okay. Le pregunté si quiere estar aquí, dice que depende de nosotros, que por supuesto sí le interesaría, pero que depende de nosotros.
No, por supuesto que Peter se quede.
Claro.
Súper bien que participe. Así que, bueno,
Sí.
Margarita había levantado su mano y Juan también, pero yo creo que ya las intervenciones de ellos debían ir más en función de las reflexiones. Así que Margarita, por favor, y después Juan.
No, listo. Gracias. Yo aquí muy emocionada. Hay cosas que no las entendí, pero muy emocionada de estar oyéndolos. Como para la reflexión, yo quiero traer al maestro colombiano Estanislao Zuleta en un libro que se llama Educación y Democracia. Él plantea en un capítulo específico del libro cómo una de las preocupaciones y que tienen que ver con los planteamientos del maestro Freire atiende a que el discurso del maestro no puede ser dogmático, que se requiere la demostración, porque la demostración implica una gran exigencia de la democracia en tanto que se le está hablando a iguales. ¿Sí? Él plantea que se le demuestra a un igual. En cambio, a un inferior se le intimida, se le ordena, se le impone. O a un superior se le suplica, se le seduce o se le obedece. En conclusión, la democracia es una lección la demostración es una lección práctica que tratar con nuestros estudiantes, tratándolos como hombres iguales desde la infancia. En ese sentido, con toda la crítica y el señalamiento y la estigmatización hacia los planteamientos de Freire, hoy la escuela es mucho más controvertida en tanto que los maestros están ausentes, buena parte de los maestros están ausentes de la teoría, de las teorías pedagógicas. En nuestro tiempo de juventud, nosotros estudiamos a Freire, estudiamos a los distintos pedagogos. Hoy difícilmente se estudia porque el discurso pedagógico está en términos de la empresa o en términos de ausentes de la escuela, y la escuela está llena, por lo menos en Colombia, de tareas que ocupan demasiado tiempo al profesor, que tienen que ver con llenar cantidad de planillas.
Sí.
Cantidad de planillas. Y no
Sí.
hay una reflexión pedagógica. En aquellos tiempos habían asambleas pedagógicas por parte de la Secretaría de Educación, por parte de los sindicatos. Se hacían, cuando se convocaron los congresos pedagógicos, se convocaron con asambleas que presentaban experiencias significativas en educación soportadas con planteamientos pedagógicos. Entonces, ahora es muy preocupante porque del lado de las oligarquías se nos atropella, se nos encierra, y en la escuela internamente ni siquiera percibimos ese peligro. En la escuela no sabemos que estamos siendo reproductores de lo que ellos quieren. Y ni siquiera tienen el temor que a veces de alguna manera nos daba un poquito a nosotros porque nos hacían, ¿cómo se llamaba? Bueno, unas investigaciones ahí eran disciplinarios, no recuerdo exactamente cómo se llamaba. Pero ahora ellos ni siquiera tienen esa preocupación porque no dan motivos, son obedientes. Y
Margarita, Margarita,
sí,
sí, disculpe, voy a pedirle a Alicia que le pueda traducir alguna de las principales ideas que usted ha dicho a Peter.
porque como yo entendí que el maestro iba a descansar.
No, 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 pero no para preguntarle, sino que para hacerlo partícipe precisamente en esa condición de iguales, en esa
Bueno,
condición.
gracias. Bueno, gracias.
Peter, I'm going to make a very brief summary of what Margarita had said. She recommended very much. Margarita, ¿puedes escribir el nombre del maestro colombiano del libro Educación y Democracia? Porque no entendí bien el nombre y no lo conozco. ¿Lo puedes escribir Stanislao?
Chuleta con Z.
Ah, Zuleta, sí,
Chuleta.
claro. Sí, no había entendido.
Ese libro se llama Educación y Democracia.
Sí, ese no lo leí, pero claro, Stanislao Zuleta, por supuesto que lo conocemos todos. Okay, so Margarita recommended very much book that is Education and Democracy by a Colombian writer, Stanislao Zuleta. That we can send information about this, Peter. Margarita, I mean, because it is very important in the history of Colombian education. This is mine, but we can ask Margarita. She's very good. Now, what she's saying, Margarita, that today there is not really study of the pedagogical speech and discourse of Freire in the schools, and that is a problem. There is not a discussion, there is not a reflection about the ideas of Freire today in Colombia, because the people in the school are very busy working on administrative issues, on papers and papers, but not on exchanging ideas and reflect on pedagogy theories. So people, the population, are closed by the oligarchies, and the students are closed in the schools because of this kind of education. Really, in the schools, the teachers and educators don't know that they are reproducing the society. They don't know that they are doing at the same time that they are doing. And so that makes a very problematic perspective for the education in this country. Ahí está Margarita.
Muchas gracias, Alicia. Gracias, Margarita. Vamos, nos quedan ya pocos minutos, entonces Juan Alfonso también había levantado su mano. En la misma perspectiva, Juan Alfonso, de
Sí,
ya hacer las reflexiones finales y después Alicia le hace una breve traducción a Peter.
muchas gracias. Bueno, muy breve. Trataré de ser muy breve para no tomar muchos minutos. Uno es, en primer lugar, saludar al pueblo colombiano y a su presidente por haber roto las relaciones con Israel. Me parece notable. Dos, señalar que la visión, el paradigma de la educación crítica que nos presenta Peter es bastante sistémica, mucho más global que solamente quedarse en la parte pedagógica. Por cierto que la pedagogía crítica es política. También hoy día Peter está profundizando en el tema de la teología de la liberación, el cual me parece también muy relevante, y no deja de ser relevante que también su preocupación por las tecnologías, que es también mi preocupación personal. Me hubiera gustado consultarle a Peter y es que hubiera profundizado un poco más sobre el abuso de los sectores de derecha fascista sobre las tecnologías, sobre el Internet, sobre la inteligencia artificial, todo esto es lo que se denomina los Big Tech. Creo que existen una alternativa a lo que están abusando y podemos profundizar nosotros en Latinoamérica y en el mundo sobre las tecnologías. Eso.
Yeah.
Gracias, Juan. Muy bien. Alicia, por favor.
Sí, estoy terminando de escribir para no que se me pase nada. First, Juan wants to say thanks the Colombian people and the President Petro for ending the relationship with Israel. So he thanks very much and he honored the president because of this decision that was today, you know, this morning.
Wow.
Second, Juan says that he understands that the thoughts Peter have developed today is more than a pedagogical perspective, but it is a systematic perspective. So real, how he sees Peter,
venía y tenía como
how he sees Juan, how he sees the ideas of Peter McLaren and the pedagogy, critic pedagogy as a political pedagogy as well, as it is systemic, as it is more than educative and occupies another fields. So Juan said that his comment is that this pedagogy, it is critic, but it is also political. Also, he thanks very much Peter because of the relationship that he creates and works with the theology of liberation and the technology. And for that, he regretted that he had no more time to ask Peter about the abuse that the fascists today make with the technology and the artificial intelligence. He would be very interested on this issue. He's interested on that as well. He studied on that. And he would be very grateful to hear what Peter thinks about this abuse from the right, from the fascists of technology for their interests and artificial intelligence for their interests. So, Peter, perhaps you have an article or a book that you can recommend Juan in order to read your ideas on this. What do you think? And we can translate. If you have only in English, we can translate. I can translate in Spanish if you want. I don't know.
I have a book on this with a young scholar from Croatia.
Yeah, you have said that at the start.
Yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
his name is Petar Jandric, and I will send you the PDF of this book.
Okay.
He encouraged me by the way, he's the editor of a book series, of a journal, actually, a book series, but a journal. I think the journal is called Post Digital Pedagogy and Science or something like that. I forget exactly the name of the journal, but we're working on a new book right now. he is really the person that pushed me to study or to get into the issue of technology. And so he's very good. And so
Okay.
we did a book together, a dialogue book on
Yeah,
this.
can you send that book to Edgardo? And then we can, okay. Juan, mira, yo me atreví, luego de traducirte, a preguntarle a Peter si él tenía artículos, tenía libros sobre el tema de tecnología e inteligencia artificial, porque era un tema que había quedado como pendiente para ti y te interesaba tanto. Y entonces Peter dice que sí, que tiene un libro escrito con un joven croata muy inteligente, que aparte es escritor y editor de una revista. No se acuerda muy bien el nombre de la revista, pero lo va a buscar y tiene un libro, y entonces yo le propuse que dice que lo tiene en PDF, entonces le propuse que lo enviara a Edgardo y que lo tengamos nosotros y veríamos de la posibilidad de traducirlo, sus artículos o algún capítulo que le indique o el libro. Y allí tendrías las ideas de él, Juan. No me
Sí,
digas que no está bueno.
sí,
Ay,
apunto lo siguiente, durante la semana, Peter nos hizo llegar un artículo que yo lo compartí con Juan, precisamente acerca del tema de lo que él llama el fascismo postdigital.
Sí,
Y era un artículo de reciente publicación,
el capitalismo
está
digital.
traducido al español. Está traducido al español, así es que donde aborda estas temáticas, y yo creo que como un material eh, inicial lo podemos compartir con todas las compañeras y compañeros. Pero ya tenemos un artículo y bueno, ahora Peter nos puede enviar el libro.
El
Pero ese
libro.
artículo inicial lo tenemos traducido ya, me parece que precisamente por un argentino, creo.
Muy bien.
Peter, Edgardo said that you have sent an article on this issue, and this article is in Spanish. Edgardo thinks that it is translated by an Argentinian, so we have this article. But would be very grateful if you can send, of course, the book and
yes,
other articles, even in English, if they are in Spanish, better, of course, but even in English, that we can make it. Right.
sure. I'd be happy to do that. I I have one question. We mentioned Colombia, and I was at a. This is very short. I was um I was speaking in a conference. I forget. It must have been in Medellin, I think. Um, and it was like a conference on Latin American philosophy or so. I forget. I was invited, um, and suddenly a group of high school teachers surrounded me and said, "Wasting your time here. Come to our school. We are waiting for you." And I said, because I finished my talk, I said, "Okay, let's go." And we went to it was in a neighborhood called, I think, Comuna 13.
Sí, Comuna 13. Yes, it's very, very well known.
And so I went there, and uh, so all the teachers were assembled there in a room, and I was asked to give a talk, and uh, and so I had been in Bogota before this, I think, and but so I started to speak, and there was someone translating, and it was a pretty hard, political talk. It was like, you know,
Yeah, yeah.
pulling no punches and suddenly the teachers' faces were a little like, you can tell the audience, what was like, "Ooh, what's he saying?" And this was quite a few years ago, and and I said, "What's wrong? I can tell by your faces that I'm saying something perhaps that making people uncomfortable." They said, "Peter, we can't talk like you." I said, "What do you mean?" We can't use that direct political, language you're using. And I said, really, why is that? And they went up to a TV set, and they had like they put a a disc in, and it showed people lying on the sidewalk and blood and everything. And they said, we were visited by helicopters, police, and we were visited by the paramilitary. And
Paracos, yes. Paracos.
Paracos.
Peter, do you remember what year was that story? I have to translate. I have to
I
translate.
don't know. It was, there's a name for that attack. Can you tell me? I forget. The school was called at that time La Independencia.
Sí.
I think it was a high
Okay.
school plus middle school combined or something.
Okay. Well, I'm going to tell you a story, right? Because that is important for the people. Bueno, Peter dice que estuvo en Colombia, no se acuerda el año, en Medellín, invitado para una conferencia. Y cuando terminó la conferencia se vio rodeado por un grupo de educadores que lo rodearon prácticamente y que lo invitaron a ir a su escuela a visitarla, que fuera a la escuela con ellos. Y él dijo que sí. Y entonces fue a la escuela con los educadores, con una escuela, le parece, de primaria y secundaria. Esa escuela estaba en un barrio que él recuerda que se llamaba Comuna 13. Comuna 13 es un símbolo en Medellín y en Colombia, ¿no es cierto?, de represión para los que no son colombianos en este grupo, muy conocida. Entonces, él estaba en esa escuela, empezó a hablar, toda la gente sentada, y le hicieron como una pequeña conferencia, y se dio cuenta al ratito de que, pues, ponían mala cara, ponían cara como incómoda, se dio cuenta que la audiencia estaba incómoda. Entonces paró de hablar y les preguntó qué les pasaba, si él estaba diciendo algo que era incorrecto, que les molestaba. Y entonces los docentes dijeron, es que nosotros no podemos hablar como usted aquí, en este lugar, en este país. Entonces le relataron que era un barrio en el cual había helicópteros permanentemente, había paramilitares, que en Colombia se dicen paracos, había todo tipo de visita policial, que había mucha violencia y que era difícil hablar como él hablaba. Y él se sintió muy tocado por esto. Eso es lo que relató hasta ahora. Do you want to follow up your story?
Yeah, I would just say that the Colombian teachers are the bravest teachers I've ever met in my lifetime. You know,
Good.
I went and I was introduced to, I think it was the head of the teachers union. I can't remember names or the names of the union, but I remember I was talking to him, and of course someone was translating with me. I was just talking, and I said, why are so many teachers who've come to this big meeting in a big conference hall? There's a lot of them that are limping and have crutches because they were shot.
Entonces, Peter dice que él considera que los maestros colombianos son uno de los más fuertes y valientes, brave, valientes, la palabra, que él ha encontrado en su vida, que inclusive en esa reunión estaba el secretario o el coordinador, el presidente del sindicato de maestros, que también estuvo hablando largamente con él y contándole muchas cosas, que él se sintió muy tocado y realmente, pues, preguntó entonces al representante del sindicato por qué había tantos maestros en esa conferencia y tanta gente interesada. Y el presidente del sindicato le dijo, porque están interesados en lo que usted dice por lo que pasa en este país.
Then he said, Peter, I'm the president of this union. Every president of this union historically has been assassinated.
Yeah.
And I know I'm going to be assassinated, but this is important work to do.
Dios mío.
I mean,
Y también el presidente del sindicato le dijo, también sé que todos los presidentes de este sindicato de docentes han sido asesinados y que yo también probablemente sea asesinado, pero es un importante trabajo que hay que realizar.
every school I was taken to on a tour had a wall with paintings, portraits of teachers at that school who had been assassinated.
En cada escuela que yo visité había paredes donde estaban escritos los nombres de los maestros que estaban asesinados.
It was incredible.
No, this is Colombia
Do
today.
you know the name of that famous attack? They call it something. It's a name. When the helicopters came, the Paracos, they all came and invaded Comuna 13.
Comuna 13. Sí,
13. And
13, 1, 3, 13,
Three.
13. Comuna
13.
13, Comuna 13. Yes, there are films, books, and articles written about that. If you are interested, we can send to you.
Oh, very, very much.
There are very many. It's a model case. Margarita, él está muy interesado por el tema de la Comuna 13, por el ataque, la toma del ejército, etc. Entonces yo le estoy diciendo que nosotros podemos enviarle artículos y material. There are a lot of videos and films on this case. Y podemos enviarle este material si él quiere, y luego que él lo traduzca, ¿no? ¿Qué te parece?
Yeah.
I am asking to my Colombian colleague. ¿Tiene una pregunta, Margarita?
Yo quisiera anotar una cosita al respecto. Espero que me equivoque más bien. Hoy, lamentablemente, no son tan señalados, no son tan estigmatizados. Las listas de aquel entonces no son, hoy no existen, porque los maestros son distintos. Entonces, hoy no tenemos el número de maestros asesinados como en ese entonces, ni amenazados como en ese entonces, precisamente por lo que yo acotaba, porque no representan, muchos maestros no representan un peligro para el statu quo de la sociedad, porque se asimilaron al discurso y asimilaron, y la práctica está asimilada a repetir contenidos que no desmoronan en lo más, que no producen grietas en el sistema educativo ni en el sistema político de Colombia. Entonces, en ese sentido, lo peligroso resulta es que quien lo hace más fácilmente es detectado, porque son menores, son más visibilizados en el sentido de que son más pocos los maestros, que en ese entonces éramos muchos y las listas eran enormes, las listas de amenazados. Y bueno, de todas maneras le produce a uno una profunda tristeza que alguien que venga a una conferencia sienta el peso de la muerte, el temor y el miedo. Sí, es muy doloroso, muy doloroso. Ahora lo están sintiendo, sobre todo los ecologistas, los ambientalistas, los líderes sociales.
Los líderes sociales.
Muy bien. Alicia, entonces hacemos esta traducción final para Peter y luego ya hacemos la despedida. ¿Ah? Entonces,
Sí,
por favor, haz la traducción final de lo
sí,
que dijo Margarita.
le iba a pedir a los compañeros que también leyeran el chat, donde hay compañeros que están escribiendo referencias, ideas y reflexiones que son muy importantes de tener en cuenta, ¿eh? También sobre este asunto. Peter, today, that is what Margarita said. Said that today we have not such a high quantity of educators and lists like as we have in the past century, because of the same problem that she had pointed out, that it is the issue that the teachers today, they are not all of them absolutely knowing or trying to work on what with Freire's idea. So 20 or 30 years ago, it was popular, and there are lists of teachers, and so it is very evident. Today, it is not so evident because of this issue of the administrative issues, etc., that in a way make them a little bit less political from a point of view. But the murder continues, and now continues in the line of social leaders and human rights fighters and ecologists and ambientalists that work on the field. But that it was very usual in the years that you mentioned. And then you have some comments coming from other teachers and attendants here in the chat that you can, perhaps you can make a photo and then you can translate, because there are very important ideas.
Bien, bien. Quiero volver a agradecer mucho a Peter la, la amabilidad que ha tenido de compartir entre iguales. Que le cuente, por favor, dile a Alicia que le cuente a Henry Giraud de qué se trata esto, para que Henry Giraud mm, no tenga temor de participar el día 16 con nosotros. Y, y que él se lleve de todos los latinoamericanos y latinoamericanas que estamos acá, incluyendo los pueblos ancestrales como Ichi, eh, un pedacito del alma de Latinoamérica para acompañarlo en la dura lucha que él está dando también allá en Estados Unidos.
So, Peter, Edgardo said that we are so thankful of your presence and your 2 hours with us today. Very, very thankful. Also, please try to remember that we are with you in your fight in the United States, trying to expand the ideas of Freire, and think that all Latin Americans are on your supports your ideas, and offers collaboration. Also, Edgardo said that please talk with Henry Giraud. We have written to Henry Giraud to explain the methodology. No answer till now. I'm going to do again this night. But if you have the chance of the exchange, so please to tell him how is the methodology of this program and how it works, in order to prepare a little bit him on the next session on May 16. But we are very, very thankful, and think us, the Latin Americans, as an allies to you.
Oh, thank you.
Como aliados, Edgardo.
Yeah.
Sí, le dije.
Y Alicia, a ti, un agradecimiento enorme también, Alicia, lo has hecho magnífico. Creo que ha sido una nueva jornada hermosa, bella, como las anteriores. Juan, usted es el anfitrión, así que usted cierra
Muchas
y da la
gracias.
despedida.
Muchas gracias, Alicia, muchas gracias, Gardo, y muchas gracias, Peter, por estar con nosotros. Muy agradecido. Solo recordar que por favor nos dejen sus datos personales para integrarlo. La grabación de esta actividad quedará